On May the 8th, 1945, the world erupted in the biggest celebration modern history had ever seen. 6 long years of war, millions dead, entire cities destroyed, and then, suddenly, it was over. Or was it? WWII Day marked the fall of Nazi Germany, but behind the cheers were untold stories of resistance, sacrifice, and a world still burning in the Pacific. So what led to this moment of triumph? And why, even as people danced in the streets, did some soldiers still have to fight? Welcome back to the war. The road to VE Day was soaked in blood. After D-Day in June 1944, Allied forces raced across Europe, liberating city after city. Paris, Brussels, Warsaw. But the closer they got to Berlin, the harder the fight became. The Battle of the Bulge in late 1944 nearly turned the tide back in Hitler's favour. It was the largest and bloodiest battle the US fought in Europe. Then came the crossing of the Rhine in March 1945. Germany was collapsing from all sides. British, American, French, and Soviet forces pushed in. But Hitler didn't surrender. Instead, on April the 30th, he took his own life in a Berlin bunker. And when his successor tried to end the war, Stalin wasn't having it. We'll get to why 2 surrenders were signed in a minute. On May the 7th, at 2:41 a.m., German General Jodl signed the unconditional surrender in Reims, France. But Stalin, furious that the West was stealing the spotlight, demanded a second ceremony in Berlin on May the 8th. By 11:01 p.m. that night, the surrender became official. Nazi Germany was no more. Where were your grandparents or great-grandparents on VE Day? If you've heard stories passed down, tell us in the comments. We'd love to read them. The moment the news broke, it was like a dam burst. In London, over 1 million people packed the streets. Churchill gave 2 speeches. At Buckingham Palace, the royal family waved to the crowd, including Princess Elizabeth, who slipped into the crowd in disguise and joined the revelry. In the US, President Truman dedicated the day to FDR, who had died just weeks earlier. New York's Times Square turned into a party of confetti, jazz, and spontaneous parades. In Paris, people lit bonfires, kissed strangers, and raised glasses to the Free French. Even in POW camps across Europe, Allied prisoners burst into cheers when they heard the news. But for some soldiers, there was no celebration, because for them, the war was far from over. But we'll get to that shortly. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a human one. Women who had worked in munitions factories danced in the streets. Families hung out flags. Children, many of whom had spent years evacuated from cities, were finally reunited with their parents. Beer flowed freely in pubs. Church bells rang for the first time since 1939. In small towns across the world, from Canada to New Zealand, communities held parades, lit bonfires, and gave thanks. It wasn't just the end of a war, it was the end of fear. Rationing, bombings, blackouts, all suddenly felt like a memory. Have you ever celebrated something that felt bigger than yourself? VE Day was that moment for millions. And here's the part most people forget. While Europe cheered, the war in the Pacific still raged on. In May 1945, American forces were locked in the brutal Battle of Okinawa, the bloodiest in the Pacific theater. Kamikaze attacks were relentless. Entire Japanese civilian populations were caught in the crossfire. Over 150,000 people would die before the battle ended, and while Germany had surrendered, Japan refused. The fear? That a full-scale invasion of Japan cost millions of lives. This was the tension that eventually led to the atomic bombings in August, but on VE Day, that horror was still to come. Should VE Day have waited until Japan surrendered too, or was the world right to celebrate when it did? In Canada, church services were packed. Sailors danced with nurses in Halifax. In Australia, bonfires lit up the Sydney sky. Even in the middle of the night, people banged pots, lit fireworks, and cheered. In the Soviet Union, Victory Day came a day later, May the 9th, due to time zones, but their celebrations were no less intense. Fireworks, parades, and 1,000-gun salutes echoed through Red Square. In India and parts of Africa, where colonial troops had fought for Britain, celebrations were mixed. Some danced, others protested. For them, VE Day raised an uncomfortable question. If they had fought for freedom, why were they still under colonial rule? That question would spark independence movements all across the British Empire in the years to come. VE Day was filled with joy, but also with silence. At 3 p.m. in Britain, a 2-minute silence was held. Factory machines stopped. Radios went silent. Even soldiers on the front line paused. Because, for every person celebrating, there was someone missing. World War II had claimed over 70 million lives, including entire families, entire cities, entire communities. And while Europe was free, the scars ran deep. Holocaust survivors had no homes to return to. Cities like Warsaw and Dresden lay in ruins, and millions of refugees were now scattered across the continent. That silence wasn't just about remembering, it was about promising never to let it happen again. So here's the truth. VE Day was a turning point. It marked the end of tyranny in Europe, the fall of the Nazi regime, the survival of democracy. It was joy, relief, rebirth. But it also started something new: the Cold War, the nuclear age, the reshaping of borders and nations. And for those who fought, bled, or lost someone, it wasn't just the end of war, it was the beginning of everything that came after. What would you have done if you were alive on V Day? Celebrate, or mourn, or reflect? Let us know in the comments. Hi soldiers, how are you going to celebrate this year's VE Day? Let us know in the comments. And if you're enjoying our content and want to support the channel, please consider joining our membership program. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to check back in again soon. That's an order.